George Washington, the first president of the United States, is often regarded as a symbol of leadership, courage, and integrity. However, his story began in the modest surroundings of colonial Virginia, where his early years shaped the man who would eventually guide a fledgling nation toward independence and democracy. Born on February 22, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia, George was the eldest of 6 children born to Augustine Washington and Mary Ball Washington. His family belonged to the gentry class, a group of wealthy landowners who played an important role in the social and political fabric of the British colonies. The Washingtons were not among the richest families in Virginia, but they were comfortably well off. Augustine, George's father, had inherited substantial land and was a successful planter. He also held various local positions, including Justice of the Peace and member of the Virginia House of Burgesses, which was a prestigious legislative body in the colony. Augustine's social standing would prove influential in George's early life. However, his father's death in 1743, when George was just 11 years old, marked a significant turning point in the young boy's life. As the eldest son, George inherited his father's responsibilities, though his inheritance was far from the wealth and power of other gentry families. George's early education was limited, reflecting the norms of the time for boys in Virginia's rural society. Unlike his peers in Europe, who had access to formal schools and universities, young George was primarily tutored at home. His mother, Mary Ball Washington, was a strong influence on his early years, instilling in him a sense of discipline, personal responsibility, and duty. However, his education was sporadic, as the family's financial constraints prevented them from hiring the best tutors. Nonetheless, George was a keen learner, and his intellectual curiosity led him to develop a love for mathematics and surveying, subjects that would later prove invaluable in his military and political career. In his early teens, George took a particular interest in the art of surveying, which allowed him to explore the vast landscapes of Virginia and begin learning about the natural world. In 1749, at the age of 17, he was hired as a surveyor for Lord Fairfax, a prominent landowner in the region. This opportunity not only provided George with practical experience, but also gave him a deeper connection to the land that would be so central to his life. His work as a surveyor introduced him to the political and economic systems of the time, as he interacted with landowners and settlers, many of whom would become important figures in Washington's later political career. By the age of 20, George had gained a reputation as a capable and ambitious young man. In 1753, at the age of 21, Washington's military career began when he was appointed as a lieutenant colonel in the Virginia militia. His first major military experience occurred during the French and Indian War, where he was tasked with delivering a message to the French, urging them to vacate the Ohio Valley. The failure of this diplomatic mission led to the start of the war, and Washington quickly found himself thrust into the chaotic world of military conflict. His early experiences in the war, which included both setbacks and triumphs, were formative in shaping his leadership style and his understanding of military strategy. The war also exposed Washington to the complexities of colonial politics. He navigated tensions between British authorities, colonial governments, and local Native American tribes. Though he was still a young man, Washington began to gain valuable insights into the intricacies of governance and diplomacy. His time in the military taught him the importance of discipline, teamwork, and the ability to make quick decisions under pressure, traits that would become central to his character in later years. Washington's involvement in the French and Indian War also had a profound impact on his personal life. It was during this time that he became acquainted with many of the men who would later become his political and military allies, including Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton. These relationships would prove crucial as Washington later assumed leadership roles in the Revolution and the formation of the new nation. Despite his military successes, Washington faced many challenges in the years following the French and Indian War. The conflict had strained colonial resources, and Washington struggled with the limited support from both the British government and the colonial militias. Nonetheless, his experiences during this period honed his ability to lead and provided him with a deep understanding of the difficulties faced by the American colonies. It was also during this time that Washington began to develop a strong sense of American identity, which would later influence his decision to fight for independence. After the war, Washington returned to Virginia, where he took up farming at his Mount Vernon estate. Although the estate was not as financially successful as he had hoped, Washington's time as a landowner helped him refine his skills in management and economics. His time at Mount Vernon allowed him to reflect on his experiences and his place in the growing tensions between the colonies and Britain. As he observed the mounting dissatisfaction with British policies, Washington's sense of duty and loyalty to his country deepened, setting the stage for his future role in the American Revolution. In conclusion, George Washington's early life laid the foundation for the remarkable career that would follow. Born into a family of modest wealth, he overcame the loss of his father at a young age and pursued a path marked by ambition, resilience, and an unwavering sense of duty. His education, military experiences, and personal hardships shaped his character and prepared him for the leadership challenges that lay ahead. The young George Washington, with his commitment to personal growth and his burgeoning sense of responsibility, would soon emerge as one of the central figures in the struggle for American independence and the formation of the United States. The path that led George Washington to become a pivotal figure in American history was not solely shaped by his early life in Virginia or his eventual presidency. It was profoundly influenced by his military experiences, particularly during the French and Indian War. This conflict, which spanned from 1754 to 1763, was a North American theater of the broader 7 Years' War between Great Britain and France, and it provided Washington with the foundational military and leadership skills that would serve him throughout his career. Washington's involvement in the war began at the age of 21, and the experiences he gained during this turbulent period played a critical role in shaping his future as a military leader. The French and Indian War was fundamentally a battle for territorial control in North America, with the British and French both seeking dominance in the Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes region. Washington's initial military role came in 1753 when the colonial Virginia governor, Robert Dinwiddie, sent him on a mission to deliver a letter to the French forces in the Ohio Valley, demanding that they vacate the area. This mission, though unsuccessful in its diplomatic aims, marked Washington's first direct encounter with military leadership. He failed to persuade the French to leave, and shortly thereafter, tensions between British colonists and the French escalated into open conflict, thus sparking the war. Washington's first combat experience came in 1754 when he led a small militia in an engagement at the Battle of Jumonville Glen. During this confrontation, Washington's forces ambushed a French scouting party, resulting in the death of a French officer, Joseph Coulon de Jumonville. This skirmish, though minor in comparison to the larger battles that followed, had significant political and diplomatic consequences. The French, furious over the death of Jumonville, retaliated by surrounding Washington's fort, leading to Washington's surrender at the Battle of Fort Necessity. This defeat, the first of many for Washington in his military career, left a lasting impression on him, teaching him the difficult realities of warfare, the importance of strategic planning, and the complexities of military diplomacy. Following the surrender at Fort Necessity, Washington returned to Virginia, but his military career was far from over. The subsequent years of the French and Indian War were marked by a series of military campaigns that saw Washington involved in both failures and successes. His rise to prominence began in 1755 when he was appointed as lieutenant colonel in the Virginia Regiment and participated in the ill-fated Braddock Expedition. Led by British General Edward Braddock, the expedition aimed to capture Fort Duquesne, a French stronghold in what is now Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The expedition ended in disaster, as Braddock's forces were ambushed by French and Native American forces, resulting in a crushing defeat for the British. Washington's leadership during this battle, particularly his efforts to organize a retreat, earned him respect and admiration from his fellow officers, even though the mission failed. The Braddock expedition revealed to Washington both the unpredictability of war and the critical importance of leadership under pressure. Despite the defeat, Washington's calm and composed demeanor during the battle earned him further recognition within the military. His ability to lead and inspire troops under fire, even in the face of overwhelming odds, began to solidify his reputation as a capable military commander. More importantly, the experience deepened Washington's understanding of warfare in the wilderness, particularly the challenges of fighting in unfamiliar terrain and dealing with guerrilla tactics employed by French and Native American forces. Over the next few years, Washington continued to serve in various military capacities, participating in additional campaigns aimed at weakening French positions in North America. While he did not achieve any significant military victories, his involvement in these campaigns exposed him to a wide array of military strategies and tactics, shaping his evolving understanding of military leadership. Washington's experience in the French and Indian War helped him develop a nuanced approach to warfare that emphasized flexibility, resourcefulness, and the importance of maintaining morale among his troops. He became increasingly adept at managing the logistics of war, organizing supply lines, and coordinating with local militias, all skills that would be invaluable during the American Revolution. A key moment in Washington's military evolution came in 1758, when he was promoted to the rank of colonel and took part in the successful capture of Fort Duquesne. This victory was symbolic, as it marked a turning point in the British campaign against the French in North America. Although Washington's role in the battle was relatively minor compared to other commanders, his leadership in previous years, particularly in organizing and motivating troops, was credited with contributing to the overall success of the mission. The capture of Fort Duquesne represented Washington's first significant military success and cemented his status as an emerging military leader. Throughout the war, Washington also had to navigate complex relationships with Native American tribes, many of whom were allied with the French. As a commander in the Virginia militia, Washington had to deal with the challenges of maintaining these alliances and managing the delicate balance of power between the colonial settlers and the indigenous peoples of the region. Washington's approach to Native American diplomacy was pragmatic and largely based on securing the loyalty of tribes who might provide crucial support in the conflict. While he was not always successful in these endeavors, his experiences during the war would later shape his policies toward Native Americans during his presidency. The end of the French and Indian War in 1763 marked the beginning of a new phase in Washington's life. The war had left the British government deeply in debt, and as a result, tensions between the American colonies and Britain began to escalate. Washington, like many other colonial leaders, began to sense that the relationship between the colonies and the British Crown was increasingly untenable. Although Washington retired from active military service after the war, his experiences during the conflict had transformed him into a seasoned leader, one whose skills and reputation would play a key role in the years to come. In conclusion, the French and Indian War was a critical period in George Washington's life that shaped his development as a military leader. Although he faced early setbacks and was often thrust into difficult situations, Washington's perseverance, adaptability, and leadership qualities emerged as key attributes that defined his character. The war exposed him to the realities of military conflict, the complexities of colonial governance, and the challenges of diplomacy. These lessons would prove invaluable when he later took on the leadership of the Continental Army during the American Revolution. Washington's military beginnings during the French and Indian War laid the foundation for his later successes and cemented his place as one of the most important figures in American history. The years following the conclusion of the French and Indian War were pivotal in George Washington's life, not only in terms of his personal and military development, but also in his evolving understanding of the political landscape in colonial America. During this period, Washington transitioned from a soldier to a more politically engaged figure, ultimately helping to shape the direction of colonial resistance against British rule. His involvement in the political turmoil of the 1760s and 1770s marked the beginning of his active role in the American Revolution, though it was not an immediate leap from military service to revolutionary leadership. Instead, Washington's political evolution was a gradual process, shaped by his increasing awareness of the growing tensions between the American colonies and the British Crown. The French and Indian War had left Britain deeply in debt, and the British government turned to its colonies to help bear the financial burden through taxes. In 1764, the British Parliament passed the Sugar Act, followed by the Stamp Act of 1765. These were among the first pieces of legislation that directly taxed the American colonies, leading to widespread protests. As a respected figure in Virginia, Washington became increasingly vocal about his opposition to these taxes. While his primary concern was the economic impact of these acts, his involvement in the political resistance to British policies also marked a growing sense of colonial unity. Washington, like many of his fellow Virginians, felt that Britain's taxation without representation was an infringement on colonial rights and an affront to the autonomy of the colonies. In 1765, Washington joined the Virginia House of Burgesses, the colony's legislative assembly, where he became an advocate for colonial rights. He was part of the group that responded to the Stamp Act through the Virginia Resolves, which declared that Virginians should only be taxed by their own representatives. This early political action demonstrated Washington's emerging commitment to the colonial cause, even though he was still cautious in his approach. At this stage, Washington's goal was not necessarily independence, but rather the preservation of colonial self-governance and the protection of colonial liberties within the framework of the British Empire. The growing tensions between the colonies and Britain were further exacerbated by the Townshend Acts of 1767, which imposed duties on various goods imported to the colonies, including glass, tea, and paper. These acts provoked widespread protests, and colonial leaders such as Samuel Adams and Patrick Henry called for boycotts of British goods. Washington, despite his earlier reluctance to engage too directly in revolutionary politics, increasingly aligned himself with these efforts. His economic concerns grew, especially regarding the adverse effects that British taxation policies had on Virginia's economy. As a landowner and businessman, Washington was personally affected by the restrictions on trade and the growing economic hardship faced by the colonies. Despite his growing political activism, Washington remained cautious about fully embracing the rhetoric of rebellion. His personal feelings toward Britain were complex. He still considered himself a loyal subject of the British Crown. However, as colonial opposition to British rule grew more intense, Washington found himself drawn into a broader movement of resistance. His participation in Virginia's 1774 convention, which assembled to discuss colonial grievances and responses to the coercive acts, also known as the Intolerable Acts, marked a turning point in his political evolution. These acts, which were punitive measures imposed by Britain following the Boston Tea Party, further alienated the colonies and pushed many Virginians, including Washington, to the brink of rebellion. During this time, Washington's political thinking began to shift. He came to see the struggle between Britain and the colonies not just as a conflict over specific policies, but as a broader question of colonial rights and self-determination. Washington, who had long been an advocate for preserving colonial autonomy, now found himself aligning more fully with the growing revolutionary movement. He began to see the British government's actions as part of a broader pattern of disregard for the interests and rights of the colonies. While still committed to protecting Virginia's interests, Washington's sense of loyalty to the British Crown began to diminish. In 1774, Washington made a significant political gesture when he attended the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. This gathering of colonial delegates from 12 of the 13 American colonies marked the first concerted effort to unify the colonies against British oppression. Washington's decision to attend the Congress signified a deepening commitment to the colonial cause and a recognition that the colonies had to act together in defense of their rights. Although he was initially hesitant to fully endorse the radical actions of the Congress, such as calls for independence, Washington's involvement demonstrated his increasing engagement with the larger political movement for American rights. The military and political events of 1775 would crystallize Washington's political evolution. When the American colonies moved toward open rebellion following the battles of Lexington and Concord, Washington was appointed by the Continental Congress as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. This appointment was not only a testament to Washington's military leadership, but also a reflection of his rising political prominence. He had become a symbol of unity and resistance to British tyranny, a figure who was respected across the colonies for his experience, integrity, and leadership abilities. Washington's appointment marked the beginning of his transition from a politically active landowner and legislator to a central figure in the American Revolution. Washington's appointment as Commander-in-Chief was a pivotal moment in his political development, as it marked the point at which he fully embraced the cause of American independence. Though he had been an advocate for colonial rights for years, his new role required him to make a decisive break from any lingering loyalty to Britain and to commit to the idea of a new, independent nation. Washington's leadership of the Continental Army would prove to be his greatest challenge, but it also underscored his transformation from a cautious political actor to a revolutionary leader. The years leading up to the outbreak of the Revolutionary War revealed a man who had grown politically astute and willing to take bold steps in the face of growing threats to colonial freedom. Washington's early political activism, while tempered by caution, eventually evolved into full-fledged support for the independence movement. His journey from a young soldier and landowner to a leading revolutionary figure exemplified the broader transformation taking place within colonial society. Washington's evolving political beliefs, rooted in a desire to protect colonial autonomy, defend the rights of the American people, and resist British encroachment, set the stage for his central role in the fight for American independence. In conclusion, George Washington's political evolution from a cautious colonial leader to a revolutionary figure was a gradual process influenced by the growing tension between Britain and the American colonies. Washington's participation in key political events, such as the Virginia Resolves, the Continental Congress, and the military actions of the Revolutionary War, marked his transformation into a symbol of colonial resistance and independence. While Washington's journey toward revolution was not immediate, it was deeply shaped by his experiences, and his ultimate commitment to the cause of American liberty was a defining feature of his leadership during the Revolution. In the summer of 1775, as tensions between the American colonies and Great Britain reached a breaking point, George Washington was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army by the Second Continental Congress. This appointment was a defining moment not only in Washington's life, but in the history of the American Revolution. It marked the beginning of Washington's leadership in the struggle for American independence, a role that would test his strategic and personal qualities in ways he had never experienced before. His leadership would ultimately shape the success of the Revolutionary War, but it was also a responsibility that he carried with great weight, understanding the challenges it presented and the importance of his actions. At the time of his appointment, Washington was already a respected figure due to his military experiences in the French and Indian War. Though he had been a somewhat reluctant military leader, his experiences had developed in him a strong sense of discipline, strategy, and leadership under duress. Washington's background as a landowner and Virginia's political elite also gave him a degree of credibility and respect, making him a logical choice to lead a Continental Army comprised of volunteers from various colonies. His appointment was not solely based on military experience, but also on his reputation for integrity, commitment to the colonial cause, and ability to unite people. Washington accepted the command with full knowledge of the monumental task that lay ahead. The Continental Army was far from a well-equipped, well-trained force. It consisted mostly of local militias, inexperienced soldiers, and a lack of resources. Washington's immediate priority was to turn this disorganized group into a professional military force capable of standing against the British Army, the most powerful military in the world at the time. The challenges were immense. The Army lacked basic supplies, uniformity, and coordination, and Washington was faced with the difficult task of instilling discipline and unity in an army with diverse political and regional allegiances. One of Washington's first major challenges was the Siege of Boston, where the British had established a stronghold following the battles of Lexington and Concord. Washington took command in July 1775, and the situation in Boston was dire. The British Army, though entrenched in the city, was surrounded by the colonial militias. Washington's goal was to break the siege and force the British to abandon the city. Although he lacked sufficient artillery and had limited supplies, Washington's strategic thinking and persistence became apparent. He ordered the construction of fortified positions and sought to acquire the necessary artillery to challenge the British. His efforts culminated in the successful acquisition of cannons from Fort Ticonderoga in New York, which were transported to Boston in the winter of 1775 to 1776. The presence of these cannons, along with Washington's ability to coordinate a siege, forced the British to evacuate Boston in March 1776, marking a crucial victory for the Continental Army. Despite this early success, Washington faced numerous setbacks and obstacles as he sought to build a functioning military force. One of the major difficulties was the inconsistent commitment of the soldiers, many of whom were local militia members who enlisted for short periods of time and lacked the discipline and training necessary for a prolonged conflict. Washington's leadership was tested repeatedly as he worked to maintain morale and unity among his forces. His personal character, marked by resolve, patience, and a deep sense of duty, played a critical role in holding the army together, even as frustrations mounted. Washington did not hesitate to discipline soldiers, but he also understood the importance of maintaining their confidence and dedication to the cause. Another critical issue for Washington was his relationship with the Continental Congress. Although the Congress had given Washington command of the army, they often failed to provide sufficient resources or clear strategic direction. The lack of a centralized authority and the competing interests of the colonies meant that Washington frequently had to navigate a political landscape rife with inefficiencies and local interests. This put him in a delicate position, as he had to balance the demands of Congress with the realities of warfare. On several occasions, Washington expressed his frustration with the lack of support, but he also understood that the survival of the Revolution depended on maintaining unity within the Continental Congress. In the autumn of 1776, Washington's leadership was severely tested during the campaigns in New York and New Jersey. After the British successfully captured New York City, Washington found his forces in retreat, with the morale of his army plummeting. Many soldiers were disheartened, and the Continental Army faced the real possibility of collapse. However, Washington's resilience and ability to inspire his troops were crucial during this dark period. His decision to cross the Delaware River on Christmas night in 1776, leading to the surprise victory at the Battle of Trenton, was a pivotal moment. The victory at Trenton revived the spirits of the Continental Army, boosted the morale of the revolutionaries, and restored confidence in Washington's leadership. This was followed by another victory at the Battle of Princeton, which demonstrated Washington's ability to capitalize on momentum and take the initiative in the face of adversity. Washington's military strategy was marked by pragmatism and caution. Unlike many traditional military leaders of the time, who sought decisive battles to achieve victory, Washington understood that the war for independence would be a long and grueling conflict. He realized that the key to success was not necessarily defeating the British in one grand battle, but rather wearing them down over time, using strategic retreats, guerrilla tactics, and the harshness of the American environment to his advantage. Washington's ability to adapt to the changing circumstances of the war was one of his greatest strengths, and it contributed to the eventual success of the Continental Army. The winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge was one of the most challenging periods of Washington's command. The Continental Army was plagued by disease, starvation, and a lack of supplies, and the morale of the troops was at an all-time low. Yet, Washington's leadership during this time became one of the defining moments of his military career. Despite the hardships, he remained steadfast, ensuring that his soldiers were trained and disciplined by the Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer who helped to instill the military discipline necessary for future successes. Washington's ability to maintain his leadership and inspire his men during the darkest of times was a testament to his resolve and commitment to the cause. As the war progressed, Washington's leadership became increasingly crucial not only in military matters, but also in unifying the diverse forces of the Revolution. He understood that the success of the Continental Army depended on cooperation between the colonial militias and regular army units, as well as support from foreign allies such as France. The French alliance, secured in 1778, was a turning point in the war, and Washington's ability to forge this critical alliance highlighted his diplomatic skill and his recognition of the importance of international support for the American cause. In conclusion, Washington's tenure as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army was marked by significant challenges and hardships. His leadership during these years demonstrated qualities of perseverance, strategic adaptability, and an unwavering commitment to the cause of American independence. Washington faced not only the difficulties of organizing and leading an army in the midst of war, but also the pressures of maintaining political support and unity within the Continental Congress. His success in navigating these challenges, including pivotal victories such as the Siege of Boston, the Battle of Trenton, and the Battle of Princeton, ultimately laid the groundwork for the successful pursuit of independence. Washington's military leadership was instrumental in turning the Continental Army from a ragtag militia into a professional force capable of challenging the might of the British Empire. The period of 1777 to 1778 marked a crucial turning point in the American Revolution, and the Saratoga Campaign stands out as a key military and diplomatic event in this pivotal chapter. The success of the Continental Army at the Battle of Saratoga in October 1777 not only boosted morale, but also had profound implications for the trajectory of the war. It was a victory that showcased the growing strength and coordination of the American forces under George Washington's leadership and demonstrated the strategic importance of alliances in the pursuit of independence. Beyond the battlefield, the victory at Saratoga was the catalyst for France's decision to enter the war as an ally of the American colonies, a development that would change the course of the Revolution. The Saratoga Campaign itself was a two-pronged offensive launched by the British aimed at cutting off New England from the rest of the colonies. The British strategy involved the movement of three separate forces converging at Saratoga, New York, where they would gain control of the strategic Hudson River corridor and isolate the rebellious colonies. The British forces were led by General John Burgoyne, who, despite initial successes, faced significant logistical challenges as he moved southward. His reliance on slow-moving supply lines, difficulties with terrain, and the resistance of local militias severely hampered his ability to advance efficiently. Burgoyne's troubles were compounded by the resistance of the Continental Army, which was led by General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold. Washington had entrusted Gates with command of the Northern Army, though Arnold's leadership and tactical skills would eventually become crucial to the victory. The American forces, though smaller and less equipped than the British, capitalized on Burgoyne's vulnerabilities, particularly his overextension and his reliance on a single line of communication for supplies and reinforcements. Washington, even though not directly involved in the fighting at Saratoga, provided critical strategic guidance and support, recognizing the opportunity to weaken the British position in the northern colonies. The eventual American victory at Saratoga was a decisive moment in the Revolution. After a series of intense battles, including the Battle of Freeman's Farm and the Battle of Bemis Heights, Burgoyne was forced to surrender his army to the Continental forces on October 17, 1777. This victory was not only a significant military achievement, but also a propaganda victory, one that demonstrated the growing competence of the Continental Army under Washington's leadership. The Americans had decisively defeated a large British force, and the victory at Saratoga gave the fledgling United States an enormous boost in terms of morale and credibility on the international stage. The strategic importance of Saratoga, however, extended beyond the battlefield. The victory proved to the European powers, particularly France, that the American colonies had a legitimate chance of winning the war. Up to that point, France had been covertly aiding the Americans, supplying them with arms and funds, but had refrained from openly entering the war due to concerns about the outcome. The success at Saratoga, however, was seen as a turning point, and France, recognizing the opportunity to weaken Britain, formalized its alliance with the American colonies in 1778. The French decision to enter the war provided the Americans with much-needed military and financial support, as well as a crucial diplomatic victory on the world stage. The French alliance was transformative for the Continental Army and the Revolution as a whole. It provided Washington with the additional resources, troops, arms, and naval support that were vital for the continued fight against Britain. France's entry into the war also led to Spain and the Netherlands providing indirect support to the American cause, thus broadening the scope of the conflict for Britain. The support of the French Navy, in particular, would prove to be critical in securing American victories in later years, especially during the Siege of Yorktown in 1781, which led to the ultimate British surrender. Washington, for his part, understood the value of the French alliance and worked diligently to maintain strong relations with the French government. While there were moments of tension between the Continental Army and the French forces, particularly regarding command structure and the distribution of resources, Washington's leadership ensured that the alliance remained strong and effective. He also recognized the need for French military expertise, and the contributions of French officers like Marquis de Lafayette and Baron von Steuben helped to professionalize the Continental Army. Their experience and training played a key role in transforming the American forces into a more disciplined and capable fighting force. Despite the victory at Saratoga and the subsequent French alliance, Washington still faced significant challenges. The war was far from over, and the Continental Army was not yet on solid footing. The harsh winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge exposed the difficulties faced by the American troops, who were plagued by disease, hunger, and inadequate clothing and shelter. However, Washington's leadership during this winter would prove to be one of his defining moments. While many soldiers left the army due to the dire conditions, Washington's resolve kept the army together. His ability to motivate his troops and maintain their morale, even in the face of tremendous hardship, was instrumental in preserving the integrity of the Continental Army. Valley Forge also marked a turning point in the Army's effectiveness, as Baron von Steuben's training helped transform the American forces into a more professional and disciplined military. The drilling of troops and the establishment of proper military procedures contributed to the Continental Army's improved performance in subsequent campaigns. By the time spring arrived, Washington's forces were in a better position to face the British head-on, and the Army's newfound discipline would be a critical factor in the success of future engagements. The political and military implications of the French alliance were also felt on the international stage. The British now had to contend with the growing strength of the American forces, bolstered by French support, and they found themselves increasingly isolated in their efforts to suppress the rebellion. The war had expanded into a global conflict, with British forces fighting not only in North America, but also in the Caribbean and Europe. The broadening of the conflict placed additional strain on Britain's resources, making it more difficult for them to sustain their military efforts in America. In conclusion, the Saratoga campaign and the subsequent French alliance were transformative moments in the American Revolution. Washington's leadership, even though not directly involved in the Battle of Saratoga, played a crucial role in the victory, which had far-reaching military and diplomatic consequences. The French alliance provided the Continental Army with the resources and support necessary to continue the fight, and the subsequent transformation of the American forces at Valley Forge further enhanced their military capabilities. Washington's ability to maintain leadership during this period of transition, along with his diplomatic skill in managing the alliance with France, contributed significantly to the eventual success of the American Revolution. The victory at Saratoga and the French alliance marked a clear turning point in the war, setting the stage for the eventual American triumph. The winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge stands as one of the most emblematic and challenging moments in the history of the American Revolution. For George Washington and the Continental Army, it was a period of immense hardship, but it was also one that would shape the future of the American military and test Washington's leadership in ways few other events could. The conditions at Valley Forge were dire, with the soldiers facing extreme cold, inadequate clothing, food shortages, and rampant disease. Yet, despite these overwhelming challenges, Washington's leadership and the fortitude of his soldiers turned what could have been a debilitating blow to the Continental Army into a moment of transformation and resilience. By the time the Continental Army settled into camp at Valley Forge in December 1777, the Americans had endured a series of difficult defeats, including the loss of Philadelphia to the British. Washington's troops, weakened by months of retreats and skirmishes, faced morale problems as well as logistical nightmares. The Army had not only suffered from a lack of supplies, but also from the depletion of its ranks as soldiers' enlistments expired and reinforcements were slow to arrive. Additionally, disease ran rampant through the camp, with smallpox and typhus taking a heavy toll on the soldiers. Many of Washington's officers feared that the Army was on the brink of collapse, and even some of his fellow commanders questioned his ability to maintain control over such a demoralized force. However, Washington's leadership during this difficult winter would prove to be one of his greatest accomplishments. Recognizing that the survival of the army depended not only on military prowess, but also on maintaining the morale and cohesion of the troops, Washington adopted a strategy of patience and resolve. Instead of fleeing or disbanding the army, he stayed with his men and addressed the situation head-on. His presence at Valley Forge, along with his efforts to keep the army unified, was a testament to his commitment to the cause and his determination to see the revolution through to victory. One of Washington's most significant decisions during this time was the recruitment of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian military officer who had previously served in the German states. Von Steuben, who had experience in training European armies, took on the task of instilling discipline and professional military standards in the Continental Army. His training regimen included basic drills, formations, and the systematic organization of the troops, which had been lacking up until this point. Through von Steuben's efforts, the American soldiers learned to function as a cohesive unit, and the improvement in their discipline and efficiency was profound. The once unruly and undisciplined militias now operated with greater coordination and purpose. Von Steuben's work was not limited to training the soldiers in the fundamentals of warfare. He also instilled a sense of professionalism and pride in the ranks. His emphasis on cleanliness, organization, and respect for hierarchy was crucial in shaping the army into a force that could compete with the British regulars. This training had long-term benefits, as the Continental Army would go on to display greater tactical and strategic sophistication in the years to come. The transformation of the Continental Army at Valley Forge laid the foundation for future American victories, as Washington now commanded a more disciplined and capable force, ready to face the challenges ahead. In addition to von Steuben's training, Washington also focused on maintaining the morale of his soldiers. He knew that the army's will to continue the fight was as crucial as its physical strength. As such, he made efforts to personally engage with the soldiers, ensuring they understood the importance of their sacrifices. Washington's ability to inspire loyalty and confidence in his troops during this time was critical in keeping the army intact. His perseverance through the harsh winter, never leaving his men, even in the face of immense difficulties, solidified his reputation as a leader who was deeply committed to the cause and willing to endure the same hardships as his soldiers. The conditions at Valley Forge also led to significant improvements in the logistical operations of the Continental Army. With the support of Congress and the French, Washington worked to improve the supply lines and address the severe shortages that had plagued the army. Though resources remained scarce, the Army's organization and ability to obtain supplies slowly began to improve. Washington's ability to navigate the political landscape and secure resources from Congress and foreign allies was essential for the survival of the Continental Army. By the end of the winter, Washington's army was in a much stronger position than when it had arrived at Valley Forge, though the journey ahead would still be long and uncertain. However, Valley Forge was not just a military training ground. It was also a place where the political dynamics of the revolution were at play. Washington's ability to maintain control over the army and prevent internal dissent was a testament to his political acumen. During this time, there were rumblings of discontent among some members of Congress, and even within the ranks of Washington's officers. Some questioned his ability to lead, and rumors of coups circulated. Yet, Washington skillfully navigated these political pressures. He solidified his position by continuing to engage with Congress, maintaining communication with key political figures, and reinforcing his reputation as the indispensable leader of the revolution. His ability to manage both military and political concerns during this critical moment helped ensure the continued cohesion of the revolutionary effort. The winter at Valley Forge also saw the emergence of strong leadership within the army itself. Washington's officers, including Nathaniel Greene, Alexander Hamilton, and Marquis de Lafayette, demonstrated their commitment to the cause and their growing leadership potential. The experience of surviving and training together at Valley Forge created a strong bond among Washington's senior officers, many of whom would play key roles in the later stages of the war. The camaraderie developed during this period formed the foundation for the close-knit leadership that would carry the Continental Army through the remainder of the war. In the context of the broader revolution, Valley Forge marked a significant moment of resilience and transformation. The army had not only survived the harsh conditions, but had emerged stronger and more united than ever before. The Continental Army's improved readiness and discipline would soon be put to the test as Washington prepared for the next phase of the war. In particular, the Army's enhanced capabilities would be pivotal in the upcoming military engagements, especially the strategic battles that would follow in 1778 and beyond. The lessons learned at Valley Forge about leadership, training, perseverance, and the importance of unity would remain central to the success of the American Revolution. In conclusion, the winter at Valley Forge was a defining moment in the history of the American Revolution, both for George Washington as a leader and for the Continental Army as a fighting force. The suffering endured at Valley Forge, combined with the transformative training provided by Baron von Steuben, helped forge an army that would go on to secure American independence. Washington's leadership during this time, marked by his determination, resilience, and commitment to his troops, proved that the strength of the revolution lay not just in military victories, but also in the character and unity of its people. Valley Forge solidified Washington's role as the indispensable leader of the American cause and demonstrated the Continental Army's potential to overcome adversity and triumph over the British forces. By the time of the Battle of Yorktown in 1781, the American Revolution had entered its decisive phase. After several years of struggle and fluctuating fortunes, the Continental Army, now a more seasoned and disciplined force, had become an increasingly formidable opponent to the British Army. The French alliance, which had been crucial to the American cause since 1778, had strengthened the revolutionaries' position. The arrival of French troops and naval support had tipped the balance of power, making it clear that the British could no longer sustain their efforts to crush the rebellion. Yorktown, Virginia, became the site of the final confrontation, where the combined American and French forces, under the leadership of George Washington and French General Rochambeau, decisively defeated British General Lord Cornwallis. This victory marked the end of major combat in the Revolution and set the stage for the eventual peace negotiations that would lead to American independence. The events leading up to the Battle of Yorktown were influenced by several critical factors. First and foremost was the increasingly strained position of the British Army. The British forces were spread thin, fighting a global war on multiple fronts, including in the Caribbean, Europe, and India, in addition to their struggle to quell the American rebellion. The British had suffered significant losses in previous years, particularly after the defeat at Saratoga in 1777, which had prompted France's entry into the war. As the British focused on holding major cities such as New York and Charleston, they left themselves vulnerable to a concentrated American assault, particularly in the southern colonies, where Cornwallis had been operating. In 1781, Washington, with the guidance of his French allies, decided to capitalize on Cornwallis' overextension in the southern colonies. After a series of skirmishes and battles in the Carolinas, Cornwallis moved his forces to Yorktown, a position he believed would offer strategic advantage and protection. The British commander aimed to maintain a foothold in the southern colonies while waiting for reinforcements and supplies. However, Cornwallis underestimated the speed and coordination with which Washington, Rochambeau, and their forces would be able to strike. Washington saw an opportunity to pin Cornwallis down, and he began preparing for a siege that would effectively cut off any potential British escape or reinforcement. Washington's decision to act with such swiftness and precision was made possible by the years of military experience and the growing effectiveness of the Continental Army. With von Steuben's training and the battle-hardened soldiers who had emerged from Valley Forge, Washington now commanded an army that could operate with efficiency and coordination. However, the most decisive element in the Yorktown campaign was the involvement of the French. France's military commitment had provided critical support throughout the war, but at Yorktown, their contribution became particularly crucial. French naval forces, under Admiral de Grasse, cut off Cornwallis' escape route by seizing control of the Chesapeake Bay, preventing the British from receiving reinforcements or evacuating their forces. At the same time, the French army, commanded by Rochambeau, joined forces with Washington's troops, creating a combined force that significantly outnumbered Cornwallis' beleaguered army. The Siege of Yorktown began in early October 1781, with the American and French forces closing in on the British position. The siege was methodical and relentless, with Washington's forces gradually tightening their grip around Cornwallis' army. As the days passed, the British found themselves trapped, with no means of escape and limited supplies. Washington, though aware of the difficult nature of siege warfare, had learned from his previous campaigns that patience and strategic pressure were key to wearing down the enemy. His ability to coordinate the American and French forces, while also maintaining morale within his own army, was critical to the success of the siege. This was no longer the disorganized force that had suffered at the hands of the British in the early years of the war. It was a unified, disciplined military machine. The fall of Yorktown was inevitable, and on October 19, 1781, Cornwallis formally surrendered to Washington and Rochambeau. The British forces, numbering around 8,000, laid down their arms, effectively ending the major combat operations of the American Revolution. The victory at Yorktown was a significant symbolic and military triumph for the Americans, but its importance extended far beyond the battlefield. The surrender of Cornwallis represented the collapse of British hopes for quelling the rebellion through military force. The British public, exhausted by years of war and increasingly disillusioned with the conflict in America, had lost its appetite for continuing the fight. The victory at Yorktown gave momentum to peace negotiations, ultimately leading to the Treaty of Paris in 1783, which recognized the sovereignty of the United States. Washington's role in the Battle of Yorktown was crucial, but it was not without its challenges. The logistics of organizing such a complex military operation, especially one that relied so heavily on foreign allies, required tremendous coordination and diplomacy. Washington, who had already demonstrated his skill in managing the political complexities of war, now had to navigate the sometimes tenuous relationship between the Continental Army and the French. At various points during the war, tensions had arisen between Washington and the French commanders, particularly over issues of command and the distribution of resources. However, during the Yorktown campaign, Washington's diplomatic acumen was evident in his ability to foster a sense of cooperation and mutual respect between the American and French forces. The French alliance, which had been critical to the war effort, was now the key to ensuring the final victory. Yorktown also marked a high point in Washington's military career, as it was the culmination of years of struggle and sacrifice. It was the result of not only his strategic genius, but also his resilience in the face of adversity. The Continental Army, once a collection of local militias with no formal training, had become a professional force under his leadership. Washington's ability to adapt to the changing circumstances of the war, embracing unconventional strategies, managing a diverse army, and forging important alliances, was a testament to his growth as a military leader. The successful siege of Yorktown was a direct reflection of his ability to unite both the American and French forces toward a common goal. The victory at Yorktown had far-reaching consequences for both the American and British sides. For the Americans, it marked the effective end of British attempts to suppress the revolution. The surrender of Cornwallis, while not officially ending the war, was the most decisive blow to British morale and military capabilities. The British government, under Prime Minister Lord North, recognized that continuing the war was no longer viable, and peace talks began in earnest. For Washington and the Continental Army, it was the culmination of years of struggle, sacrifice, and perseverance. Washington, who had witnessed the lows of Valley Forge and the highs of Saratoga, could finally see the realization of his long-held vision of American independence. The Battle of Yorktown also had a significant impact on Washington's personal legacy. As the general who led the Continental Army to victory, Washington was solidified as a national hero, and his leadership was recognized as indispensable to the American cause. However, Washington was not one to revel in the glory of battle. He understood that the victory was not his alone. The involvement of his French allies and the combined efforts of the Continental Army were integral to the success at Yorktown. Washington's humility and sense of duty, even in the face of victory, further endeared him to his troops and the American public. In conclusion, the Battle of Yorktown was the culminating event of the American Revolution, and it symbolized the triumph of the American colonies in their struggle for independence. George Washington's leadership, combined with the critical support of the French, played an instrumental role in the success of the campaign. The victory at Yorktown ended major combat operations and paved the way for peace negotiations, leading to the recognition of the United States as an independent nation. Washington's ability to unite the American and French forces, along with his strategic brilliance, culminated in a military and diplomatic victory that changed the course of history. Yorktown was not just a military victory. It was a triumph of the American spirit, leadership, and the vision of independence that Washington had long espoused. The victory at Yorktown in 1781 effectively sealed the fate of the American Revolution, but the struggle for independence was not yet over. The formal end of the war would come in the form of diplomatic negotiations, the most important of which was the Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783. For George Washington, the path to peace was as fraught with challenges as the battlefield had been. After years of military leadership, Washington's role in the post-war period would shift from that of a general to a statesman, navigating the complex terrain of diplomacy and nation-building. The Treaty of Paris marked not only the end of British rule in the American colonies, but also the beginning of a new phase in Washington's life and in the history of the United States. The process of negotiating peace was far from straightforward. After the British surrender at Yorktown, both sides understood that a negotiated settlement was inevitable, but the terms of that settlement would be contested. Washington, who had led the American forces to victory, understood that the diplomacy that followed the military victory would be just as important in securing the future of the fledgling United States. His experience as a military leader had provided him with valuable insight into the importance of alliances, strategy, and maintaining a unified front, lessons that would prove critical in the complex negotiations ahead. The negotiations for the Treaty of Paris began in earnest in 1782, with American diplomats Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay representing the United States. Despite their diplomatic prowess, the negotiations were difficult. The British, though militarily defeated, were still a powerful nation and sought to retain as much influence as possible over their former colonies. The French, who had been crucial to the American victory, had their own interests, particularly concerning the fate of Canada and the future of European geopolitics. Meanwhile, Spain, which had provided support to the Americans during the war, also had its own territorial ambitions. The challenge for the American diplomats was to navigate these competing interests while ensuring that the rights of the United States were protected. For Washington, the success of the treaty was of paramount importance. He recognized that the independence of the United States was not only a matter of military victory, but also of securing recognition from foreign powers. He had long been aware of the importance of international diplomacy in achieving long-term stability and security for the United States. Throughout the negotiations, Washington worked behind the scenes to support his diplomats and provide them with the political backing they needed to succeed. He also understood that the treaty's terms would shape the future of the nation, particularly with regard to issues such as territorial boundaries, trade rights, and the protection of American interests. The Treaty of Paris, signed on September 3, 1783, was a triumph for the United States. The treaty recognized American independence and established new borders, extending from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River and from the Great Lakes to Florida. It also granted fishing rights off the coast of Canada and provided for the withdrawal of British troops from American soil. The treaty was a clear victory for Washington's vision of a sovereign nation, and it provided the United States with the international legitimacy it needed to begin its path towards self-governance. The terms of the treaty were a direct reflection of the sacrifices made by the American people during the war, and it marked the formal recognition of the United States as a free and independent nation. However, the signing of the treaty also marked the beginning of a new set of challenges for Washington and the United States. While the Treaty of Paris had brought an end to the war, it had not resolved many of the internal issues that the country faced. Washington, who had been instrumental in leading the American forces to victory, now found himself confronted with the daunting task of leading a nation that was struggling to define its identity and ensure its survival. The Articles of Confederation, the first governing document of the United States, had proven to be ineffective in providing the central authority needed to unify the states and manage their affairs. Washington, though no longer in uniform, understood that the next chapter of the American experiment would require strong leadership to build a stable and functional government. The post-war period was marked by political and economic instability, as the United States grappled with issues such as debt, interstate disputes, and a lack of central governance. Washington, who had long believed in the importance of a strong national government, recognized that the country needed a more effective system of governance. His role in the early years of the Republic would be central to the formation of the nation's government, as he became the focal point for efforts to address these challenges. While Washington's leadership was still highly regarded, the process of rebuilding the nation was fraught with difficulties. The fledgling United States faced a host of internal divisions, including debates over the size and scope of the federal government and the protection of states' rights. In the years following the Treaty of Paris, Washington played a key role in the movement toward a stronger central government. In 1787, the Constitutional Convention was convened in Philadelphia to address the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. Washington was unanimously elected as the president of the convention, a position that reflected the high esteem in which he was held by his contemporaries. At the convention, Washington was a steadying influence, offering his support to the more nationalistic factions that sought to create a strong federal government. His leadership at the convention was instrumental in the drafting of the United States Constitution, a document that would provide the framework for the new nation and ensure its survival in the years to come. The Constitution, adopted in 1787, represented a significant departure from the Articles of Confederation and laid the foundation for the federal system of government that Washington had long envisioned. The Constitution established a stronger central government with the power to regulate commerce, maintain a standing army, and levy taxes. It also created a system of checks and balances to prevent any one branch of government from becoming too powerful. Washington's support for the Constitution was vital in securing its ratification, as his leadership and reputation as a unifying figure helped to rally support for the new document. Despite his pivotal role in the creation of the Constitution, Washington's vision for the future of the United States was not without its challenges. The new government faced opposition from factions that feared the concentration of power in a central government. The debates over the Constitution were often contentious, with some arguing that it gave too much power to the federal government at the expense of the states. Washington, however, believed that a strong national government was necessary for the survival of the nation. His leadership during this period was crucial in guiding the country through the difficult process of nation-building, as he worked to balance the competing interests of the federal and state governments. As the first president of the United States, Washington faced the challenge of implementing the new government and setting precedents for future administrations. His presidency, which began in 1789, was marked by efforts to stabilize the economy, establish a national banking system, and set foreign policy guidelines. Washington's leadership helped to ensure the success of the new government and the stability of the young republic. He set many important precedents, including the tradition of a two-term presidency and the peaceful transfer of power. Washington's commitment to the principles of republicanism, his belief in the importance of civic virtue, and his dedication to the unity of the nation helped to lay the groundwork for the future success of the United States. In conclusion, the Treaty of Paris and the post-war years marked a critical juncture in the life of George Washington and the history of the United States. While the Treaty of Paris secured American independence, Washington's vision for a strong, unified nation would guide the country through the complex process of nation-building. The challenges of the post-war period, including political instability and the inadequacies of the Articles of Confederation, underscored the need for strong leadership and a more effective system of governance. Washington's pivotal role in the drafting of the Constitution and his leadership as the first president of the United States helped to shape the nation's early years and ensured its survival as an independent republic. The Treaty of Paris, while marking the end of the war, also signaled the beginning of a new chapter in the story of the United States, one that would be shaped by Washington's vision and leadership. With the Treaty of Paris and the successful conclusion of the American Revolution, George Washington's role transitioned from military leader to the first president of the United States. The challenge that lay before him was monumental. Not only had the nation won its independence, but was now tasked with creating a functional government from the ground up. The Constitution had provided a framework, but many key questions remained unanswered. How should power be distributed between the federal government and the states? How should the economy be managed? What role should the United States play on the global stage? The answers to these questions would shape Washington's presidency and the course of the new nation. Washington's presidency became the proving ground for the principles of Republican governance, the rule of law, and the stability of the federal system. Upon his election in 1789, Washington faced immediate challenges, including establishing a strong central government capable of fulfilling its constitutional obligations. One of his most significant challenges was the creation of the executive branch. The Constitution had provided for the office of the president, but it left the scope of presidential powers unclear. Washington, who had already demonstrated great leadership throughout the war, was keenly aware of the importance of setting precedents for future administrations. His approach to the office of the presidency would shape the executive branch for generations to come. He set a key precedent for the presidency as one that was above party politics and personal ambition, acting as a unifying force for the nation. Washington's first order of business was to build his cabinet, a group of advisors who would assist him in managing the various departments of government. He appointed Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury, and Henry Knox as Secretary of War, among others. The selection of Hamilton, in particular, was of great significance. Hamilton's vision for the future of the United States included a strong central government with a robust economy supported by a national bank. Jefferson, on the other hand, held a more agrarian vision of the United States, advocating for stronger state governments and a limited federal structure. These divergent philosophies would come to define the political landscape of Washington's presidency and set the stage for the formation of the nation's first political parties. One of Washington's most critical tasks as president was managing the nation's finances. The American Revolution had left the country deeply in debt, and the new government needed a plan to stabilize the economy. Alexander Hamilton, as Secretary of the Treasury, proposed a series of measures designed to strengthen the federal government's control over the economy. His plan included the assumption of state debts by the federal government, the creation of a national bank, and the establishment of a system of tariffs and taxes to generate revenue. These proposals met with considerable opposition, particularly from Jefferson and his allies, who feared that a strong federal government and a national bank would infringe upon the rights of the states. However, Washington sided with Hamilton's vision, recognizing that economic stability was essential for the survival of the young nation. In addition to financial stability, Washington also had to contend with foreign policy challenges. The United States, newly independent and still fragile, was navigating a complex global order. The French Revolution had erupted in 1789, leading to a conflict between France and Great Britain that threatened to draw the United States into war. Washington, who had long valued neutrality, sought to maintain American independence from European conflicts. His proclamation of neutrality in 1793 was a defining moment in American foreign policy. Washington's policy of avoiding entanglements in foreign wars was grounded in his belief that the young nation needed time to consolidate its strength before becoming embroiled in European affairs. This policy would have a lasting impact on American diplomacy and would guide future administrations, though it would also spark considerable debate within the country. Despite Washington's preference for neutrality, tensions with Britain and France continued to simmer throughout his presidency. The British continued to occupy forts in the Northwest Territory, and their impressment of American sailors was a source of deep frustration. Meanwhile, the French Revolution created divisions within the United States, as many Americans sympathized with the French cause, while others were wary of the chaos and violence it had unleashed. Washington's decision to remain neutral was not without criticism, particularly from his political opponents. However, his belief in preserving the United States' sovereignty and avoiding unnecessary conflict ultimately guided his actions. Washington's leadership during these turbulent years reinforced his reputation as a steady hand in the face of adversity. Washington also faced growing political divisions at home, primarily due to the ideological clash between his supporters, known as the Federalists and Jeffersonian Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. The Federalists, who were led by Washington's Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, advocated for a strong central government, a robust economy, and close ties with Britain. The Jeffersonian Republicans, on the other hand, championed states' rights, agrarianism, and closer ties with France. These philosophical differences over the role of government and the future of the nation led to the formation of the first political parties in American history. Washington, although deeply aware of these divisions, sought to maintain a sense of national unity and refused to align himself with any particular faction. Washington's neutrality in foreign policy and his support for Hamilton's economic agenda placed him at odds with Jefferson, who favored a more decentralized government and a foreign policy that aligned more closely with France. Despite these differences, Washington sought to rise above partisan politics and maintain the unity of the country. He was cautious about the growth of political parties, which he viewed as potentially divisive forces that could undermine the stability of the government. In his farewell address in 1796, Washington famously warned against the dangers of political parties and foreign alliances, urging the nation to prioritize national unity and independence. His farewell address, in which he reflected on his presidency and offered guidance for the future, became a cornerstone of American political thought. Domestically, Washington also faced significant challenges, including uprisings such as the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794. This rebellion, sparked by farmers in western Pennsylvania protesting an excise tax on whiskey, tested the strength and authority of the federal government. Washington responded decisively, sending a large militia to suppress the rebellion. This action sent a clear message that the federal government had the power to enforce its laws and maintain order. The Whiskey Rebellion marked a pivotal moment in Washington's presidency, as it demonstrated his commitment to upholding the rule of law and the authority of the federal government. In terms of domestic policy, Washington also laid the groundwork for the nation's infrastructure. He oversaw the establishment of the first federal departments, the creation of a national postal service, and the development of a system of roads and canals that would facilitate trade and communication across the vast country. Washington understood that a strong economy required robust infrastructure, and his administration worked to lay the foundation for a prosperous and interconnected nation. By the time Washington left office in 1797, the nation was on much firmer ground than it had been when he first took office in 1789. The federal government had been established, the economy had been stabilized, and the United States had avoided being drawn into foreign conflicts. Washington's leadership during this formative period had been crucial to the success of the young republic. His ability to navigate the complex political, economic, and foreign challenges of his time, while maintaining a commitment to national unity and Republican ideals, set the stage for the future of the United States. In conclusion, Washington's presidency was marked by the establishment of foundational principles that continue to guide the United States today. His leadership not only helped to create a functional and stable government, but also set key precedents in foreign policy, economic governance, and political unity. Washington's commitment to neutrality in foreign affairs, his support for a strong central government, and his willingness to confront domestic challenges head-on laid the groundwork for the success of the United States. His presidency, though not without its controversies, shaped the trajectory of the nation and solidified his place as a key figure in the founding of the United States. Washington's leadership during both times of peace and turmoil proved to be indispensable in the establishment of the American Republic. George Washington's contributions to the creation and shaping of the United States of America extend far beyond his military triumphs or his presidency. As the nation's first president and a unifying figure during its infancy, Washington's leadership set essential precedents and laid the foundation for a government that would endure for centuries. His influence continues to resonate in the political, cultural, and social spheres of American life. Washington's legacy is often defined not only by his accomplishments during his life, but by the principles and values he instilled in the nation. From his role in the Continental Army to his 2 terms as president and his voluntary departure from power, Washington's life exemplified the ideals of republicanism, unity, and civic responsibility, ideals that continue to guide the United States to this day. At the heart of Washington's legacy lies his commitment to the Republican principles of governance. As a soldier, he fought for the independence of the American colonies, but as a statesman, he championed the cause of a government that would protect the rights of its citizens while avoiding the pitfalls of monarchy and tyranny. Washington understood that the success of the American Revolution depended not only on defeating the British, but on creating a government that would ensure liberty, justice, and the rule of law. His leadership in the creation of the United States Constitution and his role in defining the powers and responsibilities of the presidency were critical to the establishment of the Republic. Washington's steady hand and willingness to sacrifice personal ambition for the common good set an example for future leaders. One of Washington's most enduring contributions was his establishment of presidential precedents. The office of the president was uncharted territory, and many of its powers and responsibilities were not clearly defined by the Constitution. Washington, with his characteristic prudence and careful consideration, worked to shape the role of the president. He established the cabinet system of advisors, which has since become a vital component of the executive branch. By selecting a group of trusted individuals, including figures such as Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, Washington set the tone for how the president should rely on expertise and diverse perspectives to make informed decisions. Additionally, Washington's decision to step down after 2 terms in office solidified the principle of voluntary transition of power, a vital element of American democracy that continues to define the office today. Washington's presidency also established key precedents in foreign policy. His administration sought to avoid entangling alliances with European powers, a stance that reflected his belief in American neutrality and independence. Washington's farewell address in 1796, in which he warned against the dangers of political parties and foreign entanglements, remains one of his most significant and quoted documents. His emphasis on national unity and his call for Americans to prioritize the welfare of the nation over partisan interests set a standard for future administrations. His policy of neutrality, though later challenged in various ways, became a cornerstone of American foreign policy for much of the 19th century and helped the United States avoid involvement in several European conflicts during its early years. Another aspect of Washington's lasting legacy is his role in shaping the national character of the United States. Washington was a symbol of virtue, selflessness, and the idea of public service. His personal integrity and commitment to Republican ideals set a high standard for public office holders. Unlike many leaders of his time, Washington did not seek to consolidate power for personal gain. His refusal to accept a 3rd term as president was not only a testament to his humility, but also a clear indication that he placed the interests of the nation above his own. This notion of selfless service became embedded in American political culture and continues to influence the expectations of public leaders. Washington's example reinforced the idea that holding public office was a responsibility, not a privilege. Washington's legacy is also closely tied to the idea of national unity. At a time when the United States was a collection of disparate states with differing interests and identities, Washington understood the importance of forging a common national purpose. His leadership was crucial in holding the nation together during its early years. The political divisions that emerged during his presidency, particularly between the Federalists and the Jeffersonian Republicans, could have fractured the young nation. However, Washington's steadfastness in maintaining the integrity of the federal system and his efforts to avoid becoming embroiled in partisan politics helped to preserve the unity of the nation. His belief in a strong, centralized government capable of managing the affairs of a diverse and growing nation set the tone for the future development of the United States. The moral and ethical qualities that Washington embodied also shaped the character of the American Republic. His commitment to civic virtue, personal responsibility, and the common good influenced generations of Americans and became central to the national ethos. Washington was often revered as a model of integrity, and his personal life was an embodiment of the Republican virtues he espoused. His leadership inspired not only the American people of his time, but also future generations, who would look to him as an example of what it meant to serve one's country with honor and selflessness. His example of placing the interests of the nation above personal ambition helped foster a sense of national pride and responsibility. While Washington's legacy is overwhelmingly positive, it is also important to recognize the complexities of his life and the contradictions within his actions. Washington, like many figures of his time, was a product of his era. His ownership of enslaved people at Mount Vernon, for example, stands in stark contrast to the ideals of liberty and freedom that he fought to establish for the nation. Though Washington's views on slavery evolved over time, and he made provisions in his will to free his own slaves upon his death, the fact remains that his personal actions were not always aligned with the lofty ideals he promoted. Acknowledging these complexities allows for a more nuanced understanding of Washington's legacy and provides a more complete picture of the man and the nation he helped to build. In the decades following his death in 1799, Washington's legacy was solidified through monuments, memorials, and the continued reverence for his character. The establishment of the Washington Monument in the nation's capital and the naming of cities, counties, and institutions in his honor helped ensure that his memory would remain a central part of American identity. Washington's influence extended far beyond his lifetime, shaping the ideals of liberty, republicanism, and democratic governance that became the core of American political culture. Washington's legacy is not static. It continues to evolve as the United States grows and confronts new challenges. His ideals of unity, selfless service, and Republican governance remain central to American political discourse. In an era marked by political polarization, Washington's call for unity and his warnings about the dangers of party politics remain especially relevant. His commitment to a government that is responsive to the people and accountable to the law is an enduring principle that continues to guide the country. In conclusion, George Washington's legacy is one of the most significant and enduring in American history. His contributions to the founding of the United States, his leadership during its early years, and his unwavering commitment to the ideals of Republican government have had a profound and lasting impact on the nation. From his military triumphs to his role in establishing the framework for American democracy, Washington's influence is felt in every corner of the country. His life exemplified the virtues of leadership, integrity, and civic responsibility, and his example continues to serve as a guiding light for the United States. Washington's legacy is not just that of a man who led the nation to independence, but of a leader whose vision for the future of the United States helped shape the character and direction of the Republic for centuries to come.